a large-scale recreation facility, but now it is restrooms, concession, some changing areas to meet the requirements we have from the grant and also to help support the splash pad and other outdoor activities there. We're also holding off and trying to refine the public safety headquarters facility for a future potential bonding proposal. So since the election, we held town hall sessions on November 28th and December 17th of 2024. Tonight we're holding this special session, and then hopefully on the 27th, the mayor and council will adopt ballot language for a proposal for a May election. Our deadline is February 11th to be able to put something on a May election. So before we get going, I kind of want to define first one, Proposal A. This is a Michigan constitutional amendment that was adopted in 1994. This limits the annual growth of individual taxable value for individual properties by lower 5% or the rate of inflation. The Headlee Amendment, also a Michigan constitutional amendment that was adopted in 1978. This limits the growth of tax revenue on existing property by capping and annually rolling back local tax rates based on, again, either inflation or 5%, whichever is lower. A Headlee override. This is the common term we use for the voter authorized additional millage that's above the rolled back charter millage that is set. So based on any ballot proposal, it could be used for a specific purpose. It could be used for general operating, just depending on how the ballot proposal is written. Charter millage, just like I mentioned. The city's millage rate is defined in the city's charter and is rolled back based on the Headlee Amendment. Now some other financial terms, a surplus. When revenues exceed expenditures for a fiscal year, that's a surplus. Is a deficit. And then the last term I'm going to define is fund balance. This is essentially the city's cash reserve. These are used to cover unexpected emergencies. Often you hear it referred to as a rainy day fund. The Government Finance Officers Association recommends a minimum fund balance of at least 15%. That equates to about 2 months worth of expenditures. So as we move in, I want to address a couple misconceptions regarding the city's Headlee override. The first one, this has to do with tax breaks for developers and corporations. If we didn't give away tax breaks to developers, we wouldn't need an override. The city utilizes development incentives. The two main types have to do with brownfield and then neighborhood and enterprise zones and pilots. Brownfield tax incentives. These are used typically to help eliminate environmental hazards on a particular piece of property. They're also used to help redevelop blighted or obsolete properties. Brownfield incentives are given to developers to help cover the eligible costs based on the increase of the property's taxable value for a set number of years. These incentives help cover things like remediation of some kind of long-term has been just over $1.25 million over the last 20 years at an average of $62,000 per year. It's important to note, none of the city's general fund went for these projects. The cost has been from the city's major road fund, which is tax money that is collected at the state level and redistributed to cities for transportation projects. And now I'm freezing. There we go. Third misconception, this last one I'm going to hit on. The city's had 10 years with the last override to get their house in order and get their spending under control. We shouldn't still need an override. Unfortunately, because of the mechanics of Proposal A and the Headlee Amendment, an override is going to be necessary for most, if not all, older communities. Because the Headlee Amendment places limits on local government tax rates by linking the required decreases in millage rates to the growth in property values for existing property. Also, the override is required because in order for us to ever get above that rolled back charter millage rate, it will require a voter authorization, also known as our Headlee override. Unfortunately, in the past, had we have ever experienced some kind of property value decrease, we could have had what we would call a Headlee roll-up. So if our property value decreased, our millage rate would roll back up to offset that. In 1994, with Proposal A, that linkage between property value declines and millage rate increases went away. This creates a situation that really puts especially older communities at a disadvantage. As you can see from this graph, going back to 2002, we were on a nice steady increase of property taxable value. Conversely, our charter millage was rolling back, but because things were happening fairly proportional to each other, we were still doing okay. The Great Recession hits in 2008, 2009. Property values crash. Our taxable value crashes. Does our millage rate increase to cover that? No. Unfortunately, the millage rate remains at that rolled back level. So at that point then, for every mill we collected, it was less money because of the lower taxable value. However, as taxable value has increased since we've made great strides and recovered, our charter millage continues to roll back from that lesser amount. This is why an override is necessary at this point still. So a couple other items I want to address before we get into the options. As you know, these are old facilities that we operate. We have a lot of issues within these facilities. Facilities, even though the Headlee proposal from November failed, these issues have not gone away. Over the next 5 years, city facilities are going to need maintenance and repairs that are estimated at approximately $6.8 million. These items include plumbing and HVAC at DPW, HVAC and electrical upgrades here at City Hall, HVAC, plumbing, and safety upgrades at Fire Station 1, plumbing and general maintenance to park restroom facilities, just to name a couple of the big ticket items. What this does not include is a new public safety headquarters that we're still pushing forward on refining plans for. It also does not include projects at Fire Station 2, which would not be in existence if we move forward with the new public safety headquarters. The only projects with the police department that are being planned now are projects that are required because this is a joint building. Things that we can't do one without the other. So these are things that will continue to need funding over the next 5-10 years. So now we'll get into some of the options, and these are options that have been presented most recently to the public at the town hall in December. So the first option, of course, is to allow the voter-authorized additional operating millage to expire. In this scenario, in the first year post the Headlee expiration, our millage rate, our operating millage rate would be estimated to be at about 11.2. The city would immediately for the first year need to look for $203,000 of expenditure cuts prior to the Headlee expiration. But once the Headlee expires, we will need to look to cut $4 million to address projected funding shortfalls. Without major structural changes, by fiscal year 2028, the general fund balance would be depleted without anything in reserve. The next option is to restore the voter-authorized additional millage at the current rolled back level. At this point, that is estimated next year to be 4.2. In this scenario, we would be able to levy approximately 15.4 mills, but we would still be in that same spot. We would need to find about $137,000 of expenditure cuts in fiscal year 26 to address a projected deficit. However, in the next few years, this deficit would balloon to a point where we would deplete our fund balance by 2033. So even in this scenario, it will require some sort of structural changes to the way we operate. Next option is to restore, essentially do a redo of our 2015 Headlee override. This would authorize the city to levy an additional 5.445 mills above the charter millage rolled back to 11.2. This would allow us to be at a millage rate similar to fiscal year 2022. And again, we would still need to identify efficiencies because we would be projecting a budget deficit by 2031. Next option, increasing the voter-authorized operating millage. In this scenario, we're looking at an increase of 2 mills above the current the estimated rolled back 4.2. In this scenario, we would be at a rate that the millage rate will be just higher than it was in 2018 through 2021. Again, we will still be projecting a budget deficit by 2032. The mechanics of Prop A and Headlee require cities to maintain fiscal discipline regardless. So whatever option ends up being chosen, we do have to maintain discipline with our finances. So a quick summary here with some long-term issues that we need to talk about. Without an override, it's going to require significant service level funding cuts. There will be no funding for building capital improvements or maintenance. So again, we're looking $4 million in the first full fiscal year after the Headlee expires. And before I move on, I will note all of these options, we're planning that this would be a 10-year Headlee override. So in 10 years, it would have to go back to voters. So next option, add a mill override. So this is about a half of a mill decrease. In this scenario, we would be looking at $137,000 of cuts in the first fiscal year, $600,000 of cuts in the next fiscal year. This would allow us to immediately fund the essential services, but again, we'd have no funding for building maintenance and the CIP there. And we would be at a point where we're in multiple years of million-dollar deficits by 2030, what I'm kind of considering a fiscal cliff. Also, you'll notice on this slide, I've put what the city's operating millage would cost the average home with a taxable value of $135,000. I used $135,000 because that's about the 90th percentile of taxable value in the city. With averages being lower than that, but I wanted to make sure we had a good number of, kind of aiming higher, because we do have of course, 90% of the homes are within this range.
Through the chair. So just for clarity, the second column, I'm going to take the third row. You have the 14.8647 operating millage would equate to a little over $2,000 in city operating tax. That's not the full tax, that's just the city's portion of the tax. Based on a 135 taxable value, you'd probably be looking at a total tax bill of about 6,000.
That's probably about accurate. So the city's operating millage makes up approximately 23% of the properties to tax bill over the course of a year, assuming it's a non-homestead. Homestead, it's going to be a little more of a percentage because you won't have the school millage on there, the school operating, which makes up, I believe, about 18 mills. So yes, this is just focused on the city operating. So the millage, the charter millage, and whatever Headlee override. This doesn't include sanitation and some of those other things. This is focused solely on this operating millage for funding the general fund.
Thank you.
Of course. So the next option, the 4.2 mills, this is the straight renewal, right? Keep it at where it is. And I have that actually highlighted. Doesn't come through as well as I was hoping. That one's highlighted kind of in white because that's essentially where we're at right now. So again, we're looking, kind of death by 1,000 paper cuts. A lot of cutting throughout the life of that 10-year override. It will require small cuts in various services. Also won't be able to fund the building maintenance CIP. And again, that term I'm using, fiscal cliff, is in about 2031. So the next option up, the renewing with half a mil. At this one, you're looking city operating tax on a taxable value of $135,000 at about $2,100. In this scenario, we wouldn't have any immediate cuts, but we would be having to look pretty close down the line to making some cuts because we're going to have deficits in about 2029. Again, like I say, requires fiscal restraint, but also no funding for building capital, and that potential fiscal cliff is coming at about 2033. So then the next option, the renewal at the 2015, redo a 10-year 5.4452 Headlee override. This one would cost that property about $2,200 in total, right? So about $700 more than just the charter millage as it is. In this one, no immediate cuts, though again, looking forward, trying to crystal ball it, we'd probably see our first deficit in about 2031. Be able to fund some, not all, of the building capital. Probably could start spreading that out over the course of the 10 years. And that fiscal cliff is likely to hit about the same time as the renewal. Very similar scenario as we would have been in 2015 when it was originally approved. So then the last option, the renewal at 6.2. This is the renewal plus 2 mills. Cost our taxable value home of $135,000, just about $800 more than it would without approving an override. There'd be no immediate cuts. The first deficit is likely looming in 2032. We would potentially be able to fund most of the building capital, though again, just like in the other option, we'll have to stretch it out over the years. And the fiscal cliff is unlikely until after the expiration. So this one, of course, being the more expensive, is going to provide the most runway. So those are kind of the options we've been scenarioing out at this point based on feedback, based on millage models. And so that puts us kind of at a decision point. We'd like, understanding the difficult position everybody's in. For us to be able to get the ballot proposal in time, we need to be able to prepare and approve ballot language on the 27th, ideally. This will give us time to be able to get the proposal to Oakland County, and just in case anything weird happens in those couple weeks before the deadline, we're able to address it. So that is the presentation I've prepared for you tonight. I do have one final slide that is essentially a duplicate of that summary that I was going to leave up on the board for everybody to be able to reference throughout the course of the evening. And I'm happy to answer whatever questions you have to the best of my ability.
Thank you. Council discussion regarding options that we've been presented.
So I have a question about the, or maybe a point of clarification about the renewal at the 2015 level. So we'd be renewing at the 2015 level, but realistically, the overall tax burden for residents is considerably lower than at 2015 because the underlying charter millage has been rolling back since 2015. So although that millage rate would be the same as 2015, the underlying charter millage rate is lower. So we're not really levying the same amount of tax that we were levying in 2015.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's about a difference of 2.2 mils.
Okay.
Through the chair. I concur with that, with the caveat that these property values have been going up since 2015. So even though the tax rate would be lower, because it was reset, with the 5.45, it was reset to 20. This would only reset it to 16.64. But the property taxes, I'm sorry, the value of the homes have been going up. So it would still be less, but it wouldn't be, as substantially less.
Right, but it's important to note that although property values have gone up because of Headlee and Prop A, we're not actually capturing all of the value of that increase.
Exactly.
Yeah, so, okay, that's helpful for me. Thank you.
Okay.
Through the chair, I did have a question that came up. The special events, people had a lot of concerns about during the last election, the loss of special events. In these scenarios, at what point would we potentially be dipping into cutting out special events?
Well, eventually it would be something we'd have to talk as a group. I don't want to right now say what exactly is on the chopping block, only the numbers that we have to get to. Ultimately, it's a council decision, but special events is likely, because if you, looking back at the original tiered cut proposal, special events were one of the first tier. So it would certainly be something we'd have to look at pretty much immediately.
Through the chair, I suspect that events would be cut at the point that you're going to end up cutting anything out of police and fire, where they're not able to support those,
Right.
the fluff, that's a fluff, or events.
Well, I guess I'd like to put it to council's discretion. Do you want to have discussion before or after public comment?
Well, through the chair, I believe there's an item on the regular agenda. So in my opinion, I think council discussion should probably take place during that topic when we get to the regular agenda.
So then open it up to audience?
Sure. I think we're at call to audience.
All right, that's what we're going to do. All right, so at this time, I'd like to open up to anyone who'd like to speak on the proposals that we have presented before you. But I'd also like to just remind everyone that there are some people in the audience who have never spoken and will be coming up to the podium for the first time. And I noticed that sometimes in some previous meetings, we've had some disruption from the audience. And I just would like us to be able to discuss this without, any sort of discussions or any sort of arguing coming from the audience. We want to hear what everyone has to say, and then come to a decision as a council as to what we're going to put on the ballot, if we're going to put something on the ballot. So I'm opening it up now. If you want to speak, you're welcome to come up to the podium to do so. We ask that you state your name and your address, and I open it up for call to audience.
And Mayor, just for clarity, it can be on any
Anything.
that they wish, not
Any
just
item.
on the
It doesn't have to be
presentation.
on just the Headlee. You can speak on anything. Correct. Good evening.
You're a pretty nice guy, I really am. James, I'm sorry, I know that's my 3 minutes. The immediate cuts, long-term issues, is that assuming we're funding the $6.8 million in repairs?
Some of that, where it says no funding for building capital improvements, we're not funding any of that 6.8.
I just wanted you to state your name and your address.
Excuse me, Mike Thompson, 1415 West Troy. Got this down to 2 minutes, so. All right, I've stated my name and my address. So none of us know what will happen in the next 3 to 12 months, but almost 12 months ago, I predicted the future for our little town. I knew how people were feeling about the economy. I knew interest rates had shaken people's optimism about their ability to find and upgrade housing. I knew the auto industry was slowing down, and I knew business owners were struggling to survive post-COVID. I also knew uncertainty would grow, especially in this town, if major changes occurred in Washington. All of those facts are still relevant today, likely more so than in November. I stand before you as a compassionate human being, not only advocating for what I believe to be a majority of residents, but also the employees of this town. As a small business owner, I pride myself on having no to very little turnover. I feel strongly that my employees and their families should experience the best work environment I can possibly provide. Sometimes that involves sacrifice, but ultimately our bills stay paid and our freezers are full. I am humbly asking you to decide on victory tonight or defeat in May. Given the many conversations I have had with residents, many very pro-police and fire, they will be voting no on any override. I can't emphasize this enough. People are struggling, and any increase will be perceived as out of touch and cruel. I do not believe there will be enough goodwill to carry even a modest increase over the line in May, not to mention what it will do to your chances of passing a bond in November. I ask you to please put your version of the future aside and embrace the future of surviving this moment together. Let's start this next chapter on the same page, in the same trench, embracing our same struggles. Let's make sure that we can all fill our freezers this year. I am asking you to trust us, the voters, to know what is best for this moment so that we can trust you going forward. This is an opportunity for all of us to come together at a time when we need to be united, not divided. Thank you.
Good evening, Dave Cottrell from 1610 Beaufield. I just generally wanting more efficiency, a lot more transparency than previous mayor, where we sold a lot of gimmickry, and one of them was the quick fix thing on the website, which never really worked, and it's easier to just call DPW and they listen to it and they take care of the problem. Some concern, I'm wanting efficiency, good use of the money, and I'd like to make sure that you maintain your buildings. I'm probably an exception. I probably would want maybe the 6.2 renewal. But I want to see efficiency, transparency, no gimmickry, and not lying to me as I was consistently at the previous mayor. A few items, well, with the bike lanes, yeah, you get your funding for the bike lanes from grants, but the operating expenses to maintain the roads, it actually increases, and the DPW has less time to maintain your roads and get the snowfall off. And also the speed bumps, which were more, we needed the speed bumps because of the speeding through the neighborhoods, but we were told that wouldn't happen because we'd have this, because we were lied to. And the speed bumps just make the DPW take a longer time to do the shoveling. And Dan, the previous DPW manager, would say he would just love to have the speed bumps away. So it was just like so many lies and so much dismissing the citizen. So if it's a really efficient system, and you're really spending your money wisely, and you're maintaining your buildings and not lying to us by omission and saying, oh, everything's wonderful, and then we find out all the buildings need to be replaced is like not what I want. I want efficiency in maintaining your buildings. Thank you. And the police really need to be improved because some of them are lousy.
Hello, Jim McLucky, 903 Emerald Street. So I've lived in Ferndale for 17 and a half years, first as a renter and then as a homeowner for the past 13 and a half years. I set down roots in Ferndale because of the community, the walkable downtown, and the central location in Metro Detroit. The time I've been here, I've only seen the city grow and improve as any highly desirable walkable city should. We've seen improved infrastructure, replaced water lines, still in progress. Roads replaced, sidewalks replaced, new bike lanes. You guys missed Livernois on your presentation. I'm very ashamed. Improved parks. We see the skate park, the dog park. We got a splash pad, much needed parking structure, major increase in living space downtown, an improved library, brand new lower elementary school, more festivals and events, increased retail and service businesses along Livernois, and number of new thriving bars and restaurants downtown. All this is possible because we've chosen to invest in the city. It's been a positive feedback loop, and Ferndale is thriving with more growth on the way. Some people don't see it that way. Some people think all of this, or some of this, is unnecessary waste and mismanagement by the people who run the city, and they want to punish and defund the city over their negative perception. At the bare minimum, I'm interested in renewing the current override to continue supporting and investing in the city. I'm not interested in defunding the city and kicking off into a negative feedback loop of disinvestment. I think that's short-sighted and malicious, and I do not want to go down that path. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Quinn Ziegler, 705 West Camborne, and I served as the chair of the Resident-Led Finance Review Committee. And so we learned a lot of what's been shared here tonight in our group. And as I continue to think about things and look at these options here, my concern is that if we renew at our current level or even just a little bit up, we create a problem where we have to cut things that are genuinely important. So things like downtown maintenance that supports our small businesses, parks and rec that support our community being able to connect with one another, special events that make our Ferndale funky. And we do this in order to do other important things like paying our first responders appropriately. And then we have to keep cutting, because it's death by 1,000 cuts, as we heard today, and there's no way out until the state someday fixes the problem. If residents vote for a +2 mills, council gets the ability to choose to make thoughtful cuts instead, gets the option to make thoughtful cuts, to be really thoughtful about what you do. And remember, you have the option not to levy those full 2 mills. Make cuts now. Be really thoughtful about what those efficiencies are and use that option not to levy those mills. And that gives us, the community, the flexibility to say, do we want to keep service XYZ because it's in line with our values, even though it costs a little bit of money? Or do we cut it to save that money? We'd be able to be a little bit more flexible in that way. My fear is that if we renew at our current level, we back ourselves into a corner where the numbers are the numbers and you have to make the cut and doesn't matter what our values are. So my preference is giving the community the flexibility to say we want to keep something because it's in line with our values. Thank you.
Hello, Spencer Lair from 1055 Alberta Street. My comment's less about the amount, and one thing, James, that you said at the very end of, or in the middle, that seemed kind of like a side comment. One thing for me in the November voting was, is this going to be a permanent Headlee override, or do we get to address it again? So regardless of what we do, I think making that less of a side comment and more forefront in the comments on the ballot proposal would go a long way for me as a resident here.
Could you stay there for a minute?
Yeah.
Could I just ask for some clarity? So you mean whether or not it's a 10-year, 5-year, what you want to know exactly what it is? Is that
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Putting the length of the override.
Thank you.
Okay?
All right. All right. Audience ending at 6:38. All right. Now it's up to us for discussion. So I guess what we need to know and discuss is, one, what proposal we'd like to see, and two, the timeline for that proposal. So I know that we've all had discussions, two-on-one with the interim city manager, and we've all had some ideas as to what we'd like to see. So if anyone would like to start with sharing their option here.
So through the chair, when we originally planned this discussion, I was not under the impression that we were going to make a solid decision tonight. I was under the impression that we were going to present the ideas, the options, allow people here to share their thoughts and opinions, and then over the next several days, allow us to interact and reach out to the people within the city, get their thoughts and opinions before making a solid decision on what the language and which option we should put on the ballot. I can share that I'm comfortable with laying out the language of what the ballot should read, but leaving the amounts, the rates, and all of that open, and have that discussion and decision on Monday.
So the reason why we have tonight is to, one, to go over the options, and two, to have some sort of direction as to where we're going as far as the meeting that comes on Monday. I think it's important because I know all of us have had something that we were more comfortable with, and maybe our reasoning behind it. Doesn't mean that it's clear and concrete tonight, but I think it's important to kind of get it out there so that we can kind of gauge what the language will be and whether or not it is something that is acceptable to the community and something that we would actually propose to put on the ballot. So it's just really to discuss it. So I know that me personally, I was between the 5.4 and the 6.2. Based on some conversations had, I know that a lot of us have pointed out the 5.4 and also the 4.7. So can we agree that we are at that level, or is there something else that that needs to be considered here? I think we need to go
Through
there.
the chair, I'm leaning towards the 5.4. I like that for the facility upgrades. I think that's important. But I also am torn on just a straight renewal due to the economy out there, and it's hard. It's hard for a lot of people. So I'm torn between either one.
So am I to understand you're at the
I'm not
four-
above 5.4 for sure.
You're not above 5.4?
No.
Okay.
And through the chair, I feel like I'm in that same boat. So you were in the meeting with myself and James, and you heard me lean towards 4.2 and 4.7. And I don't know what's going to be the most palatable to the public. I feel like going low while very difficult for us and setting ourselves up for really hard conversations about budget cuts, it's going to be difficult, but I feel like that's one way that we start potentially gaining the trust back that I feel like we're struggling with right now. 4.7 was kind of a sweet spot for me to kind of split the difference. I understand 5.4, and that gives us the most flexibility. 6.2, I just crossed off the list. I don't think that that's feasible right now. And going under a straight renewal feels like that is going to be more problematic than good. Like going with the 3.88 mil override, so the half mil decrease, I feel like that's when we're going to start really cutting into services that are going to make people upset and get them to a point where they're not going to want to support anything because now their services are cut, plus they voted in more millage.
So,
Oh,
my-
you haven't,
oh,
go ahead, please.
go ahead.
Oh, no, you were gonna follow.
I was just going to say that, so from what I'm hearing is that we are between 4.2 and the 5.4. Is that what I'm hearing so far, based on what I've heard so far?
Well,
Okay.
I'm sorry, Donnie, you haven't had a chance
Go
to
ahead,
speak,
Donnie.
so I have some things I'd like to add.
So, well, to your question, Mayor, yes, I think I wouldn't go below 4.2, and I don't support 4.2. I think it's too low. But, to Mayor Pro Tem Mikulski's point, I also want to build back trust with the public, but I'm not sure, and I know that feels like the way to do it, but I worry that the trust doesn't get improved as we begin cutting. And so I think that that's a feedback loop we have to think about, that simply slashing the government might build trust with a vocal minority of the community, but it will not build trust with the broader community that is looking for these baseline services that they value. And I think that's a line we have to walk. That yes, there are always going to be people who don't support any of this. They want no override. They want to, really watch the house burn down. We're not doing that. That's not an option because the vast majority of the community doesn't want that. But at the same time, I get it. We don't want to do a giant increase either. So, anything that's going to set us up for, I think a straight renewal without any kind of increase, even a modest increase, it's going to set us up for, we're not maintaining the buildings that are already in bad shape. We're not essentially going to maintain services. We are going to cut some kind of service within the next fiscal year. $321,000 doesn't seem like a lot, but that's enough to cancel the summer camp program in the recreation department. It's enough to, eliminate, leaf pickup in the fall. It's not a small, it's small in the grand scheme, but it's not small when it comes to having to find a service that we have to reduce in order to absorb that. And so I'm wary about setting us up for doing something that feels like we reached a compromise that actually sets us up for failure relatively quickly. That, we've compromised, but I think I do think the broader public will regret that compromise very quickly once things begin to take a turn. And if prices go up further, we're going to have to make those cuts far quicker. And that's the issue is, I hear, Mike and I hear others and what they're saying about cost of living for residents, but the government has a cost of living too.
Sure.
In order to do what we do. And, we have 25% tariffs now, effectively, with Canada and Mexico. That's going to raise the cost of the inputs to our services. So the timeline that James modeled a certain assumption. This model is essentially void as of this morning because these costs are going to go up. Our inputs to government are going to go up. We're going to lose our runway faster than we think because things are going to cost more. That's my worry too, is, if we thought we were in a better shape of, if cost inflation was getting under control or that, something like that, I just worry that our runway is shorter than we think it is based on everything that's going on.
And I think that's fair. It's very fair to look at it from that perspective. The other perspective is if we go too high because we're covered, because we want to cover ourselves, and people vote it down, now we're in a real tight spot.
Yep. Understood.
So there's a little bit of complexity that we really haven't discussed. If we go with a lower amount, so, 4.2 has been thrown out, 4.7 has been thrown out, I would not feel comfortable voting a 10-year millage for those low amounts. We're shooting ourselves in the foot. I don't even know if I would want to do a 10-year for the reset to 2015 at the 5.445.
Meaning, sorry, clarification, meaning you would want to, like, a shorter term?
Yeah, if we're going to go with a 5.454 or the 4.7, 4.2, I would suggest doing a 5-year because you'll never stretch it out to 10. It's already showing in 2029, 2027 for 4.2, 2029. You're already looking at, you're starting to make some major cuts to the budget. You're falling off the cliff in 3031 and 3033. We haven't reached this point yet. If we had done this in 15 as a 15-year that ended in 2030, we'd probably be hitting a cliff for us in 2028 if this continued on for 5 more years. So we have that we need to consider. The other thing that we could also consider is what we did in 11, when we originally did the 5.45 or the original millage reset to 20. We started out I don't know if it was a guarantee. In the language, we wrote it so that we promised the first 2 years would only be a percentage of that. So I think it was 3.35 mils for the first year or two, and then we would go up to 4 such for that next year, and then eventually cap it at 5.45. That's another option that you could do. Now, we did that as a 5-year, which was a lot easier because you were only dealing with a few number of years with a few different levels that you could adjust it to. One of those years, I remember that we didn't even increase it to the maximum because we didn't require it. So we just kept it at the rate from the year before. So that's another option. You could request the 6.2 with the caveat that, council would only raise it to, 4.5 or 5.0, the first year or two, and then increase it as the years progressed.
So like a phase in.
A phase, yeah.
Like a phase in. And then that would, in theory, that would it'd almost be set up such that as the charter millage rolls back, this would essentially kind of.
And that's what we were doing.
Hold it flat on net overall.
That's what we were doing in 2011.
I guess my question on that would go to James and Dan, maybe. Is there a way that can we legally bind ourselves to that? I see you squint, and I'm thinking through it too, and I don't know how.
But
it was a resolution. It wasn't in the ballot language. It was a resolution.
Understood. Got it.
And that didn't necessarily.
Sure. People held us to that.
But the resolution can be changed.
Of course. That's got it.
Yeah, but then you risk pitchforks and torches.
Sure. Of course. Rightfully so, if we don't keep our promise.
Well, so in that case, they would be voting in maximum amount that would have been phased in, right?
Well, the ballot would read whatever that number is, but then with that, I believe it was on the same day. I think when we passed it, we also passed a resolution, the resolution that said that, council promises that, the first year we would only implement, 3.35 seems to be the number that I recall, was what it would start out at, and then gradually phase it over the next 4 years.
I don't recall it saying promise. I think there was a statement of intent that was identified in the resolution. And I think that we can take up the language of that resolution.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Through the chair, it's an interesting option, but again, if we're talking about what's going to pass with the voting public, I just don't know that the higher millage amount's going to pass.
To add on to that, I think the issue is, I think as we learned in November, the more nuance we add to an issue, the more complicated, the more complex it is, it's hard for folks to understand what we're asking them to do.
Well, I definitely would not put 2 items on the agenda again.
Oh,
Or
no,
on the ballot.
Yeah, we're certainly not doing that. Interesting. So I think one thing I would like to note, really for the benefit of my colleagues here on the council, but also for the public, is that, the Finance Committee for the council consists of me and Mayor Pro Tem Mikulski. And sorry, I have a hair. As we move toward Ferndale's budget cycle for the fiscal 26 budget process, we have instructed James that the mission of the departments is to identify some cuts to their budget for fiscal 26. Everyone is supposed to identify cuts to their budget so that we can produce a budget that is fiscally responsible, but doesn't sacrifice core services. It doesn't do anything completely wild, but it kind of sets the tone for us, kind of resetting, let's call it our budget baseline, down a little bit. That also would go a ways toward essentially extending the runway, as we keep calling it. So, if we do a 10-year millage, by finding these kinds of efficiencies up front, one, we're honoring the intent that has been clearly stated by residents across all spectrums of belief about Headlee, which is that they would like us to make some kind of meaningful reductions in our budget up front, without sacrificing the most important services. And also buys us the runway. It means that our expenses aren't as high to start when we start the clock. And that means that whatever millage we set at, we get another year or two squeaked out of it as close, the plan is always to try to, as Councilmember Pollica was saying, the plan is always to try to get all 10 of your years. You don't want your millage, you don't want to hit a place where you've already started to essentially be bankrupt. I mean, the word that no one is saying in the room that James avoided saying is, when you've spent your fund balance and your expenses outpace your revenues, you're bankrupt. And at that point, the state steps in and takes over your city. And one thing I can assure you is that you don't want that. If you think your city services are going to be bad under a cut scenario, they will be even worse under state administration. So, what we are trying to do, what you try to do is, and what Laura and I are trying to do is find a sweet spot with the proposed budget that is a reduction over the current year's budget on net, on whole, and then that sets us up to get the full 10 years out of whatever, or a best attempt we can to, try to make sure this thing lasts all the way to the renewal date. Nothing stops us from coming back earlier. So if things start to go pear-shaped and things are, not great, we can always say, we're not going to make it the 10 years. And the options are either drastic cuts or we go with an early renewal. I mean, that's always an option for some kind of reset. So I want to make sure the public's aware of that too. We're going to try to make it the 10 years, but if something were to radically change, we may very well come back and have town halls and community meetings to say, this is the situation. What is the will of what does it feel like the will of the residents is? How would you like us to address this issue?
So in terms of the logistics regarding the Finance Committee that you and the Mayor Pro Tem serve on, are we looking to have something concrete that kind of shows what we need to show for the next coming budget? What's the timeline for this? We think?
Our timeline is essentially synced up with the regular city budget development timeline. So generally, James already has sent out the directive to the departments to begin preparing their draft budgets. They're due. Right. And the part that I'm adding in is that you will have justification hearings at the city manager stage. You will also have justification hearings with the council finance committee. So you'll have 2 rounds of justification meetings, meeting with Laura and I, the department heads, you and James. And we will also probe into the requests and what James is recommending as the city manager, assistant, or interim city manager, and then us saying, are you sure we can't do a little better on this? Could we carve a little bit here? What efficiencies could we get here? So, we will be doing that, and then that means that we would be ready, still on, we're trying to stay on the schedule such that the city manager then presents that final, with the finance committee recommending a budget to the full council on the same timeline as the budget normally. Wouldn't change, we're not trying to expand or change the timeline too much.
Well, and through the chair, I feel like the one thing that we haven't really touched on is, could we make that finance committee meeting a little bit more open to the public potentially? And in my mind, we have our budget season, that's great, and we can be very active then. But on an ongoing basis, rather than just using it as a internal touch point, using that as a conduit for us to discuss various potential cost efficiencies and analyze software as a service. That was something that our previous city manager had wanted to elevate in terms of, priority. Going through those motions publicly and analyzing things, I think is going to be, it's a no-brainer and it's a given, no matter what we do with the ballot initiative.
Yeah. So my intent is for, yes, definitely for us to do that. I think the department head meetings with us, those are not. I want to be able to speak freely with department heads because the committee is not a quorum, so we're not required to meet publicly. But I think when we have those meetings, having the bigger discussion with James, Phil, and potentially any others that may be supportive in that more, than talking about what we've learned and kind of the broader things. Absolutely. That is my intent. I know you share obviously that intent. So yes, we will have noticed finance committee meetings, even though it's not a quorum. We will still have them and we'll be here and we'll talk about what's going on with the budget development. And then I think moving forward, even just on a routine basis, having the periodic finance committee meeting that is public, that is not a council meeting, because again, the benefit of not being a quorum is we can be a little bit more free. We can talk a little bit more free. We don't have to worry about votes and procedure and orders of motions and things like that. And we can kind of do update meetings where essentially we're talking about, okay, what is the current state of things? How are things going? How are things looking? How are revenue collections, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, that is part of the ongoing plan, as I know Dave said in his remarks, transparency. And I think that's something that we're going to really double down on with this. So anyway, so to bring it back to a rate, I am, my personal preference as a resident basically is the 5.4. I'm open to 4.7 or something in between. So basically the 4.7 to 5.4 in that, let's just say that range somewhere in there. I think I'm willing to, I can be comfortable with that. I don't think I could be comfortable with anything less than 4.7. I think it leaves us in a position that really it's just not going to work out in the long run. I think we're not going to make it as far as we'd think with just a straight renewal. It's just a $500,000. I mean, in the public meetings we had, and I know part of the presentation that we had, when there was the last town hall meeting, I know they did do the Mentimeter of the residents. Obviously, that's not a scientific poll and it's not representative of the whole city, but it did feel like as the crowd was weighing in on the various proposals, it seemed like the 5.4 is where that's where things started to shift toward the 4.7 to 5.4. That's where things started to split to be a little even across the too much, too little, just right kind of categories. So I think somewhere in that is what I'm thinking.
You did a Facebook poll. How did that? I kind of leaned more towards 5.4 too. I thought.
Let me see if I can pull that up.
Looking at it today.
Let's see. So I did 2 Facebook polls, one on the Ferndale Forum, one on the Fabulous Ferndale Forum. The Ferndale Forum had 221 votes. 22% went for 5.4, 10% went for renewal at 6.2, 5% at 4.7, 19% at 4.2, which was the straight renewal, 4% at the 3.8, and then 40% at no override. And then in the Fabulous Ferndale Forum, let's take a look. to find it. For some reason, I can't find my own post on Ferndale's Ferndale Forum, but I want to say it was relatively similar, where we were seeing about 40% of people saying that they did not support an override. Let me try one last time to see if I can manage to get to it. Yep, there we go. So no override was at 45%, 3.8 mil override was at 8%, 4.2 was at 8%, 4.7 was at 6%, and 5.4 was at 24%, and then 6.2 was at 7%. So on aggregate, if we tally up everything that would vote for some sort of level of an override, you know, it might be a 50-50 split at that point.
Yeah, I'd also, you know, those polls are great on social media. The problem is that there's a lot of people in those groups that aren't even Ferndale voters. People who, you know, used to live here years ago are now enjoying their retirement on a yacht in Florida, or, you know, living in Ohio. You know, that's all great, but, you know, their opinion doesn't matter to me. They're not paying their taxes here.
To be fair, the poll that we had at City Hall as well was open to the public through YouTube, and I don't know who those voters were.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's why I'd like the next several days for me to have the ability to reach out to people that I know, that quiet majority, and allow people to reach out to me. And that's why I don't want to really make a solid decision on what millage rate I want to put in language. You know, I think just creating the language tonight, agreeing on that language, and filling in the figures on Monday, after we've had, you know, robust conversations on what we've talked about, you know, with our constituents, and going from there.
Well, I'd like to say, first of all, thank you, Well, it gives us a baseline no matter who voted for it. We have a little bit of a baseline. Ultimately, it's going to be a decision that we make and that we vote on Monday. So, but thank you for making that effort, because it was helpful. It was helpful to kind of get a little bit more than just 20 people and from the last meeting that we had in person. Well, I keep hearing a number that we keep coming back to. I keep hearing 5.4 is what we keep coming back to, based on polls, based on us up here. Although I don't think I heard 5.4 from you.
You have not heard 5.4
I don't think I heard it from you. You're the only one.
Again, I skewed lower than the rest of you, and in my defense, when I look at the 4.2 mil straight renewal, and I look at Joe's proposal, which, you know, his budget cut proposal, I have my own thoughts about it. I feel like there were some flawed things in there that don't really tally up to the total that he gave us. But his tier 1 cuts were at $802,000. And I look at that and then look at that straight renewal, and I say, just from a pure math standpoint, if I need $137,000 upfront plus $321,000 in budget cuts by fiscal year 2027, that's still under my $802,000. So that gives me a little bit of breathing room, a little bit of flexibility that could potentially be used to fund either some CIP or potentially go to our first responders and their salary increases. Now, is that tight? Yes, incredibly so. And without knowing the impact of the tariffs and, you know, the current administration and everything that's going to happen, is it feasible? I don't know. I don't know if that's possible or not. But I can tell you, when we start getting into the tier 2 budget cuts, and the, you know, IT help desk contract reduced by 50%, just as an example. The dollar value that Joe had put out there for tier 2 was, just for that item alone, $293,000. And I know that we're already looking at some potential cost reductions with our IT contract. So that's a big chunk of money. And I wonder if there are ways that we can piecemeal from that list, because I know that list isn't concrete, it's not set in stone, and it was just a first attempt. I look at that and I wonder, could we find a way by just piecemealing it like that? And again, I don't know. I don't know the answer for that.
And I know for whatever reasons, we don't really want to talk about the actual cuts right now. We just want to find the millage, the operating millage that we could work with or work around.
I think, Madam Mayor, if I may, I think the way I would frame that is, we don't want to get into like specific details of the cuts. We know we had a proposed cut plan that's, likely still going to be like 60% accurate, but there may be tweaking that we would do to shuffle around priorities in those cut phases. But the fact remains, there will be cuts. Like, there will be cuts. There's no scenario in which we don't hit a year where we haven't begun cutting. What those cuts are is something like this council will decide, or potentially a future council, depending on how far out it is when it starts to happen, kind of when it happens, evaluating what our priorities are at that time.
But we're not going into details. Would it be fair to say that there are some reductions right now in the budget because of positions that we've not yet filled?
Yes, so that is a conversation that both Pro Tem Mikulski and I have been having with James. The cuts that we're looking to make would not just be in 26, they would be immediate, effective the current fiscal year. So trying to find efficiencies, looking at our budget versus actuals reports, seeing where we're sort of running hot versus running cold, and determining what the drivers of that are, and if that's something that we can talk about. If we can essentially pull it down, draw it down now, reduce it now, let's just do so. Let's get it done, and then it's not part of the next budget either. It's not part of the wrangle for that. So yes, we are looking for current year effective immediately type reductions. And that wouldn't be things that, again, would be noticeable to the public. Like, these are going to be like back end efficiencies and sort of internal ops type stuff. We're not talking about terminating a contract for a public facing service. That's not what we're doing in the current year. But yes, looking at vacancies, what our current vacancy rate is in various departments, and what the head count realistically needs to be. If you're still delivering services with 2 vacancies in your department, can you keep living without those positions? Because you've been able to do it for a year now, that kind of question. And doesn't mean the answer is yes, the answer could still be no, but, we're going to be asking that question. Yeah.
Right. Well, the purpose for tonight is to ideally come up with a number, think about it, and vote on it on Monday. So I guess that's where we are.
So there's
There's
no
the action.
Is there no way that we can prepare the ballot language and then plug and play the numbers?
Yeah. So the motion for tonight was, the requested action from the city manager's office was, we would pass a motion to direct staff to prepare ballot language for a May 6, 2025 election for a Headlee override of blank mills over the current operating millage for a length of blank years. So, we can direct them to prepare the ballot language for what seems to be a number that a majority of us want to go for. But that doesn't mean that the conversations don't continue throughout the week and that we don't come back on Monday and, change our minds or whatever. Because at that point, we really are just changing the numbers in a Word doc. I mean, essentially.
And I don't think we've actually come to the conclusion as to the number of years yet, have we? We need to talk about that.
We do.
We need to talk about that. Because it's my understanding that although we've done 10 years in the past, in my opinion, provides the most consistency, there is no limit to 10 years, based on what you've shared with us, James.
Yeah, right. The council can set whatever timeframe they so choose.
5 years?
7
8
years.
years? 7 years?
And we could set 10 and come back in 6 and realize that wasn't,
And go for an early renewal.
yeah.
I mean, I personally, my preference is 10 years, just because I think that it gives us let's say, a goal in terms of constraining spending as best we can and, staying on top of it. It essentially sets us the task of, you got to make it 10 years. So make it 10, it's like the Oregon Trail. I have this much of supplies, now I have to make it last till I get to Oregon.
So you're motivated then?
So you're motivated to kind of say, I got to
stretch
hit
it
that
during
10
that 10
years.
years.
Yeah, I want to hit that 10 years because if I have to go back to the voters early, I'm going to have to do a lot of explanation and lift and maybe it's easy. Maybe the whole global economy is in the toilet and it's easy to say like, all right, everything's a mess. But I think 10 years gives us the goal and it gives us that longer term consistency. We know what to expect for a longer period of time.
So then I'll ask this of the legal counsel. The language that we propose, could it have a range of the millage proposal right now? Or do we have to have an actual concrete number? Because again, I think it's something we want to discuss further. So could it, for example, be between 4.7, between 4.7 and 5.4 for the ballot, for the language temporarily, and then for so many years tonight? Can we do that? Or do we need to have?
Through the chair, you don't have to. I mean, you could do it that way, but if there seems to be a consensus on the 10 years that's contemplated or proposed, you could direct that the ballot language for the May 6th election for Headlee override be brought back with the mill amount left blank, but for a period of 10 years. And that gives direction to staff to go ahead and prepare it. It will be a plug-in which would need consideration and input from council on a motion on Monday. But that gives, I think that gives staff enough to proceed forward with working on development of the language that you would consider. And it, I guess further to the extent that I think James has heard some of the comments with respect to some of the likely mill amounts that are being talked about by council. He can have input and develop materials that will show you what those mill amounts would raise for further discussion on Monday.
Through the chair, it would also be helpful for that Monday discussion to have what the average increase is to a voter. I know you had the full value of it, but kind of like the calculator tool that we had, where it was, if we're doing a half mil increase, this is how much it impacts your tax bill, your current tax bill. Something like that. That would be very helpful to visualize.
Incremental.
Yes.
Yeah, if you're talking about the calculator that was done through the campaign, that's not owned by the city, and the
Right.
city can't direct anybody to that website.
But we could theoretically do that calculation for those different models, correct?
Yeah, we could do something.
Okay,
We could show the increase or impact.
okay.
So let me pose this question to my colleagues. I think maybe the move tonight is to select essentially the range or the rough numbers, because then when we go back to talk to people, we can say we're going to be proposing a smaller set of options, and then weigh the opinion on the smaller set of options. Because, the poll's a good example. Things are spread in various ways, mostly a bell curve. But, if we go back and say, all right, here's the deal. The options we're going to be bringing to the table would be 4.7 or 5.4, or, 4.2, 4.7, 5.4. of those three, what could you get on board with? And here's the pros and cons, and here's what we get with each, and what this table tells us. So at least that gives us something to sort of narrow the conversation we have with people. Because realistic, I mean, I don't want to speak for, I can't speak for any of you, but no override is not an option. There's no will on this council to do that. That's not going to happen. No council is going to cut their city government by $4 million year over year. It's just not going to happen. And any kind of decrease is off the table. I certainly won't support that. And I just don't think that we have the desire to do that. So I think knowing the where we kind of are in one, two, or maybe even 3 rates, and then taking that narrow. Because I wouldn't meet with a resident and talk about a no override option. Because I'm not going to support that. So I wouldn't do it.
So then it sounds like if we're able to have 3 rates that we can discuss, the 4.2, 4.7, and 5.4 would be it. Right?
Or we could just go 4.7 and 5.4. You're comfortable with 4.7 right now?
I'm comfortable with 4.7. Do we want to discuss 4.2?
You can
Well,
discuss whatever you want.
Through the chair, from my perspective, 4.2 is where we are today. So if you do 4.2, you're just continuing on what we have today, and you're looking at a cliff. That says 2031. I have to believe that it's going to be a lot quicker than that, because that rate is just going to continue to drop as it has. You're going to have the 15.369 drop, as well as the 4.2, because that 4.2 started at 5.4, so we've already lost 1.2 mils in the past 10 years. You're just going to continue to lose that over the next 5 years, along with dropping the 15.369.
I'm comfortable moving to 4.7.
Yeah, my conversations that I'll have with people will be between the 4.7 and the 5.4, and pointing out, this is what we would get if we reset it at the 2015 level, and this is what you're going to lose if you go less than that.
Okay.
So before we take a vote, I'm just wondering if we have a general comfort level with the 5.4 to 4.7.
I always prefer more options, but
Well,
can get on board with.
well, and I want to stress, Laura, that we can talk to people about whatever we want.
Yeah.
That's true.
I mean,
Yeah.
we're not binding our individual conversations. I'm just saying, if I'm sitting down and talking to someone in advance of Monday's vote, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about like the 3.88, because I know that that is not a vote that's going to happen on this.
Right, if we had to cross things off the list, 3.88 can be crossed off, 6.2 can be crossed off. It feels like our discussion has centered right in the middle. And I wouldn't be against having all 3 options for us to discuss, but again, if there's consensus around that, that's great. If not, then I keep on going back to 4.7 as a nice middle road. But again, it's up to you all as well.
And we still haven't talked about the number of years,
No, I think we agreed on 10, right?
Did we agree on 10? I didn't
I don't
hear
know,
that.
Greg, you were leaning towards 5. How are you feeling?
I'll do either. It's really the comfort of the voter, if they feel strong about wanting to come back in 5 years. But honestly, I don't think any of these really set us up for success for beyond 5 years.
Through the chair, I know we're not talking about the bond tonight, but we will have bond discussions about the police and fire facility. And I know I spoke to you a little bit, James, about some of those CIP needs, and is it possible to get that in a bond? And could you fill me in just a little bit more, one more time, if any of those could be bucketed into a bond?
Is it possible? Sure. Is it fiscally prudent? Probably not. Considering a lot of those things are things that probably don't have the service life that you typically would bond a project for. You don't want to be bonding projects that are going to expire before the end of the bond. And it's 6.8 million. I think you're probably looking at a total cost over 15 years of about 9 million. So it wouldn't be fiscally prudent, and you're still looking at an annual debt service of somewhere between $600,000 and $700,000.
Sounds like,
But at the 5.4, I'm sorry, through the chair, we will be able to do some of the improvements, correct?
Right, at the 5.4, without
needing a
having to bond, yes.
it sounds like, so right now, based on our discussion, it sounds like what we need to agree on or kind of put in the suggested action is I'm suggesting, but, we'll all vote on it, is the three numbers, 4.2 to 5.4, and for 10 years. So we would need someone to make a motion regarding that, and then we would vote on it.
So, okay, so I'm gonna make the motion and I'm gonna make it in a way that I think James and Dan and Phil can work with. So I move that we direct staff to prepare ballot language for a May 6th, 2025 election for a Headlee override of a millage rate between 4.2 and 5.4452 over the current operating millage for a length of 10 years.
Support.
Johnson,
Yes.
Mikulski,
Yes.
Oh, no, sorry.
I just, before you call the question, I just want to make sure there's no discussion on the motion.
No, I think we,
I think we're.
I think we're discussed out.
Okay.
Johnson,
Yes.
Mikulski,
Yes.
Kelly,
Yes.
Polika,
Yes.
Leaks May.
Yes.
All right.
All right. With that being said, that motion carries, and we are now on to call to council. I don't know if there's any updates
I think the only,
for department heads first.
yeah, that's right. Sorry.
Now, as is customary during a special meeting, we'll forego for Monday night.
All right, then I'm going to go to my left here with Councilmember Polika.
I don't have anything.
Councilmember Johnson?
So, we have proposed a range of numbers. Now is the time to start thinking about those numbers and sending us your input and feedback. I've gotten emails from a lot of folks. Some of them are in the room right now. And so, email again, between of these numbers, which do you think is going to be the most palatable for you? And, let us know what you think. That's it.
All right, Mayor Pro Tem Mikulski?
I have nothing additional.
Nothing here.
And I just want to thank this interim city manager and for coming up with the numbers, to having the conversations. I want to thank the audience for coming out to some of the meetings that we've had and for being present tonight. Please feel free to reach out with your suggestions regarding the numbers that you've heard tonight, and we will be having a vote on this at the Monday council meeting on January 27th. With that being said, this meeting concludes at 7:26. Thank you.